Obviously, I'm Meredith, as Brett mentioned,
And I'm Will.
And really, to kind of sum up our formal Capstone project in Kenya, what we really created through the various components of our project was this applied framework for engaging historically marginalized communities. And we did this using a case study of Unity Women's Village.
Yeah, so today for our presentation, just to give you a little outline of what we will be doing, we're going to give you some contextual background on where we were, and then walk through the three main components of our project, and then end with some final thoughts, and like Brett said, any questions that you may have after. So starting with where we were.
Yeah, so very, very briefly, we're just going to give you a little bit of socio-ecological context of the country that we were working in. So to start, Kenya is a developing nation, and they gained independence from British colonization just over half a century ago. So a lot of those legacy effects are still very apparent in the region. Kenya has immense cultural diversity. There's 68 languages spoken and 43 tribes in the country. And they're world-renowned for the biological diversity. When you think Kenya, when you think East Africa, you think about people going on safaris, you see charismatic megafauna, and it's obviously home, like we heard earlier, to many threatened and endangered species as well. So what's really more important is not so much what all these systems are that exist within the context of Kenya, but how they're all interlinked and how they all play together. And that was what was more important for us in doing our Capstone project.
And so with a country as diverse, both biologically and culturally as Kenya, and really with any country, it's important to get some more regional context as well, and not look at just the big picture. So with that in mind, we want to zoom into the Samburu region of Kenya, and more specifically, the town of Archer's Post, which is where our project site was located. So as you can see on the map on the right, Archer's Post is kind of in the center of Kenya, but it's considered northern Kenya, and with that comes the arid, semi-arid landscape that makes up much of the northern part of the country. And also with that landscape comes prolonged and reoccurring droughts. In the last few decades, those droughts have gotten increasingly worse, and that is really important to note because the livelihood strategies in this area are predominantly pastoralist. Historically, those livelihoods have been mobile or nomadic pastoralism, but in the last half a century or so, the culture has started shifting to more sedentary lifestyles, yet they continue to semi-nomadically graze their livestock. And that's also important to note because Archer's Post is a town that is encircled by protected areas. As you can see, there is a number of different types of protected areas. Some of them have grazing restrictions, and some of them allow more grazing or no grazing at all. So that's limited the amount of land that these people have to graze already, and intensified it where they can graze. Also, Archer's Post recently, in the last decade, got a tarmacked road going through it, so that has increased access not only for tourist organizations, researchers, and journalists, but also allowed more freedom for goods to come and go and people to also come and go. And that has created, with the biologically and culturally diverse nature of the region, because there are a huge amount of endemic species and megafauna specifically to the Samburu region, and it's also culturally diverse as the Samburu are a people entrenched in their culture, and there are other tribes that are also entrenched in their culture in the region as well. So all of that together has really made it a hotspot for tourism. So that is what dominates the local economy, but not only do tourists come, researchers and journalists and organizations working in conservation and development really work in this area a lot, and it's become a hotspot for that. And as two researchers kind of taking our first venture into conservation and development work internationally, we felt really lucky to work in a region that had so much going on and really get to experience all of that.
And our project partner was Unity Women's Village, and they're located just outside of Archer's Post proper. And the village itself was established to liberate Unity women from social inequalities, that's namely inequalities related to gender. And the village is made up of about 20 women who all work communally to meet their needs through beadwork and some also herd livestock. And this supports approximately 50 or so children that also live in the village, but on any given day there could be 10 or there could be 60, so it's kind of hard to get a grasp on that one. So now we're going to jump into the three main components or parts of our project. But first, we want to back up and say that all of these components are really were like outlined by the year prior with coursework and conversations with our committee members, and especially Brett, who has a long history working in this region. But most importantly, what I want to mention is that we spent our first month and a half in country dedicated solely to relationship building and earning trust with Unity Women's Village, and that played a major role in the projection of our project. So, jumping into part one, as Will said, this is an international hotspot for both conservation and development work, and with that comes this constant flow of researchers and journalists coming in and out of the area. And Unity in particular being a unique outlier as an all-women's village in this patriarchal society, receives a relatively higher volume of researchers and journalists. And throughout our coursework, but also in that first month and a half of conversations and relationship building, this trend seemed to emerge of many research and journalism activities that took place within the village and in this region were unilateral and extractive. So researchers and journalists would often come in and take the women's stories, collect their information, and leave, and then rarely come back to share their final products or results. And not only is this an ethical dilemma for our research community and the journalism community, but these negative associations that are created by these past interactions can really negatively affect the validity of our research.
So with all that in mind, what we did was create a guidelines document for the community to have. So the guidelines, we really wanted to clarify the rights and expectations of the women and let anyone coming into the village know that the women understand that as participants in any work or project, they do have rights and that they understand that. Secondly, we wanted the document to encourage a dialogue between researchers, journalists, and the community, and not just have a dialogue at the beginning or the end, but throughout the process, which really lends itself to more transparency. And then lastly, and possibly most importantly, we wanted the document to promote mutual respect and reward to all parties. So kind of as Meredith was saying, that researchers and journalists can come in and effectively work in the village and attain the stories or information they're looking to, but the women also feel that they're tangibly benefiting from that interaction. And this is what the guidelines document came out to be. It's a double-sided single sheet which we laminated and brought hard copies of to the village. We also gave electronic copies to some of the village liaisons, so anyone who contacts them ahead of time can get sent this document. Essentially, there are 3 sections to it. The first one is the individual rights statement, which is exactly what I was saying before, just to clarify the women's rights as participants in work. Secondly is the initial contact and interaction, which lays out steps for how the village should be communicated with and the information that needs to be provided to them before the women decide whether to participate in any work or project. And lastly is the reciprocity and product sharing section, which is exactly what it sounds like, just trying to ensure that any project generates some reciprocity for the village and that final products and the products along the way are shared with them.
So diving into the methods that we use to create these guidelines with Unity, we first want to talk about community-based participatory action research, which is a collaborative approach that involves engaging the research participants or stakeholders throughout the entire research process. And this framework guided our entire research process from this point and all the way through to the other main components of our Capstone project. And some of the ethics that guide CDPAR are giving the community a voice, empowering your participants, action-based outcomes that actually benefit the participants of your research, and lastly, sharing those final products or results from your research. And again, holding true to the CDPR ethics and wanting to have some sort of action-based outcome and respect the information and stories that we were being given, especially in that first month and a half. That theme of final products and results rarely coming back really stuck with us, and we wanted to do something about that. So what we did was we played a BBC podcast series that Unity Women had been featured in, and this was broadcast worldwide over the internet, so a lot of people heard these women's voices. And it was about women's empowerment, but specifically overcoming domestic violence. So we had a speaker set up in the village, we had everyone gather around, and we had the audio play while our translator translated into their native language while the audio was playing. And despite these women participating in countless research and journalism activities, this is the first time that the vast majority of them had ever heard their voices on audio recording. So it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it was a rewarding experience to hear that, and they are a lighthearted group of women who kind of like to pick at each other. So they did exactly that, hearing each other's voices on the recording, and it was just enjoyable for us to kind of watch them laugh about it, but also really enjoy hearing that. And
yeah, and so not only was it fun and enjoyable, and obviously ethically sensible, you know, another reason we did this was to kind of prime the women's thinking, to get them to start thinking about those past interactions, both with researchers and journalism. And following that interview, we dove right into our methods. So first we started with storytelling-based focus groups, where we broke the women up into age sets. So we had the younger Moran age women, the junior elders, which are middle age, and then the elders. And we just sat down and simply asked them to kind of tell us about the nature and quality of past interactions with researchers and journalists. And something really important to note here is that we asked that the women do not discuss anyone affiliated with Colorado State University, because CSU does have a long history of working with this community. Obviously, we're affiliated with CSU, and we weren't sure if that would bias results, and we really didn't want to go down that road with them. So anything we say doesn't pertain to any previous research that is affiliated with CSU, which we think is mostly possible. So we went from storytelling-based focus groups, and then presenting the women with scenario planning exercises. And what this was basically presenting them with a hypothetical situation and asking them to walk us through how they would react and make decisions during that situation step by step. And another main reason we did this as well was because we kind of wanted to explore their capacity for this strategic and long-term thinking. In Samburu County, only 6% of the population actually has a high school education. So with that, we were a little unsure of how this sort of critical thinking exercise might go, but no surprise to us, we thought they'd do excellent, and that's exactly what they did. They had no problem working through those hypothetical and futuristic situations. And then lastly, we had the guidelines. We took that information, crafted the guidelines document, the first draft, and then we took it back to the community, and we had our translator translate word for word each section to these women, and they gave us feedback and comments and edits and told us what they liked and what they didn't like, and then we went back and made changes. And lastly, we also sent it to our committee and a couple other colleagues at CSU that are much more of experts on this type of research than us, just to make sure we didn't miss anything.
So during this whole process, some reoccurring themes came up that we didn't necessarily expect going into the focus groups. And staying true to the CBPR ethics and really wanting to make sure that the women felt like we were generating mutual benefit, we wanted to respond to some of those themes. And one of them was the issue of tourists and others coming to visit the area getting taken to other villages. There is a dynamic with safari guides where they want to keep some of the profit from taking their clients to villages and keep some of the entrance fee. But Unity women didn't want to participate in that scheme, and so tourists and other clients get taken to other villages all the time. We actually experienced this while we were there in kind of a dramatic fashion. A guide called another village, a traditional village of men and women, and asked all the men to leave so that it appeared to be a women's only village, and then asked one of those women to pretend to be one of the Unity women. So this was very clearly a real challenge for them and affecting their income. So we wanted to come up with some solutions or try and help out that problem. And since we couldn't change anything with the guides, we thought maybe making Unity more recognizable would help. So we began by wanting to put them on the map, and we literally did put them on Google Maps, so anyone can find their coordinates now. And then second, we took individual portraits of all the women, and we brought hard copies back to the women, but we also put them on Unity's website, so anyone visiting the website prior to coming knows all of their faces. And then lastly, we had a community banner made, which identifies Unity Women's Village, and we were lucky enough to have the help of Carrie from CLTL 5.0, who also worked with Unity, and who is a great artist, to help us with some of the graphics for that community banner. So we were really happy to present that to them. And we were really lucky, so all of this process left us with some key takeaways, and that first key takeaway is that mutual benefit, reward, and a more meaningful and impactful research process all in all can be generated through bilateral community discussions that focus on expectations and goals for the process, and that really lend themselves to creating more transparency throughout the whole process is really important.
Yeah, and then the second major key takeaway is when you're working with marginalized or natural resource dependent communities, compensation for the reallocation of their time to work with you really should be considered. And I know compensation is kind of a tricky term, but it does not only mean monetary reimbursements. And it should be based on community needs that are discussed in those conversations that we'll just talk about are so important. And then lastly, final products should be shared. And not only is this the ethical thing to do, but it can be really rewarding for both your participants and yourself.
So from here, we were really lucky to start with those guidelines because it informed the rest of our project and kind of how we would work with Unity. And we wanted to continue to explore themes that came up during our first focus groups and also themes that we knew were challenges this area faced based on our CLTL coursework. And one of those was that because this area is an international hotspot for conservation and development work, organizations often come in with preset projects designed to solve daily challenges. And although they normally have very honorable goals, sometimes they don't incorporate community feedback into that process and thereby overlook some of the complexities or the longevity and the success of that project. And we saw this also in the Samburu region, especially with access to water. Oftentimes organizations have come in to put water tanks into the villages, but unfortunately they don't consider the fact that that village may not have the capacity to continue to refill the water tanks, so then it ends up just sitting there and not solving the problem of access to water. So our main focus here was that we wanted to come up with methods that would help communities self-identify their own needs and goals. But more than that, we wanted those methods to be easily communicable and work cross-culturally and across language barriers.
So what we did and how we did this was through photo elicitation paired with future visioning. And we started all of this with informative focus groups where we then broke up the women into these age sets again and just had very, very laid back casual conversations about what do you worry about. We checked in on some of the challenges that Elliot mentioned 2 years ago with 5.0. And we also asked them what do they want for the future, for their children, for them, and for the community. And then we had all those goals that they identified through those focus groups illustrated. And we were lucky enough to have our friend and classmate, Becca Johnson, with us in Kenya, who's also an excellent artist. And she illustrated by hand all 28 photos for us that we used. And then used those in the future visioning exercise where we presented the women with the photos and asked them to either prioritize these photos or choose a preference.
So we were really interested in the results of this, but more than anything, we wanted to use the results to create a community goal book to give back to Unity. And because Unity is a largely illiterate population, we wanted it to be represented through almost no text and largely just visuals and simple to understand charts and graphs. So this is the cover page of the community goal book. And then this table of contents page outlines the 6 questions that we asked and the choices they were presented with, all coming from the focus groups. And this is the only page in the whole book that does have any text. And there are some literate women in the village who can read this and help anyone else work through it. But we tried to come up with a design that the table of contents would be unnecessary. So this one is for the second question, what do you want for Unity? We started with this graphic to show that it was a community-based question. And then the second page showed them the options that they were presented with. This one had 7 options: a second tourist hut, a dining hall, new bathrooms, a secure perimeter fence, a new shade structure, a secure bead market, and lastly a concrete boma, which is where they keep their livestock. On the right here is a pie chart that proportionally breaks up how the women prioritize those goals. And then lastly, we numerically ordered them as all the women do no numbers. And we have the actual copy of the goal book here, so I will pass that around if anyone wants to look at it.
So again, holding true to those CBPR ethics, we wanted to have some sort of action-based outcome more than just a book for the women. And really what we thought was the best thing to do was to somehow support one of these community goals in some way that the women mentioned. But this is probably something we struggle with more than anything in our entire project, is how do we support the realization of one of these goals. And after weeks and weeks and weeks of going around and around and around about this, we finally decided, yes, we're going to go through and do a fundraiser to help support this. And again, this is something we're still kind of struggling with as researchers, but we felt like it was the best decision for Unity, and we're still in contact with the women today, figuring out what they want to do and how best to go about this process of supporting them.
So again, this whole component of our project left us with some key takeaways. The first key takeaway is quite similar to the first key takeaway of part one, but it is that project success, relevancy, longevity, and sustainability can really be increased by involving the community throughout the whole process, not only in the problem identification, but in coming up with a solution and working out the best way to do that. And secondly, we found that photo elicitation, which is simply the method of inserting a visual into an interview, really was an effective tool for communities to not only prioritize their goals, but we felt that it gave them some more ownership over it as they were able to interact with the goals that they had self-identified and see them. And we also thought that it did help to break down some of the language barriers and that are associated with working in this region or across cultural boundaries.
And then the last key takeaway here is one we really didn't kind of see at first when we went through this project until we started having conversations with our advisor, Brett. And then it was just glaring and obvious that these future development goals have of natural resource dependent populations like Unity or like the Samburu people have subsequent conservation implications. So for example, we just want to highlight a couple goals that the women said to kind of make this point. So the overwhelming majority of the women prioritize a stone house for safety and security reasons. However, if their goal of a stone house was realized, this may imply that less resources are taken from the landscape to build their traditional style huts. And less resources taken from the landscape could then imply restoring of the rangeland, and obviously there's ripple effects with benefits from there. However, with conservation, there are always trade-offs. So again, if this goal is realized of stone houses, this may further sedentarization and could intensify land use in and around settlements, thereby degrading the rangeland. And then the second example here is we asked the women about their preference for whether they would rather have money in the bank or more livestock on the land, because culturally, these people, they invest their wealth in livestock. That is their money. But as they're a developing nation, they're going through these shifts, and people are starting to prefer more secure forms of investments, like putting their money in a bank. And the overwhelming majority of women, again, stated that they preferred that. So if they did, in fact, start investing their wealth more so in a banking system, this could imply less livestock on the landscape. And if less livestock on the landscape, this could imply less overgrazing and rangeland health restoration.
So that's a great transition to the third part of our project, where we really wanted to dig more into the conservation aspects of it, specifically livestock management and rangeland health. And we wanted to do this because this is a region, as we've said, shifting from nomadic pastoralism to more sedentary lifestyles, yet still semi-nomadically grazing. And not only is that important for this region, but this shift is happening in many African cultures and many developing countries across the world. But it should be noted that a lot of research has found this shift occurs differently within different contexts and different cultures. So you really need to look at it on a case-by-case basis. And not only did we want to understand that, but because this is a region prone to prolonged and reoccurring droughts, and we knew that there will be a drought returning, even though it's kind of been a lapse in this past year, those droughts do require a proactive and strategic outlook to effectively respond to them. So we wanted to explore if Unity women were more reactive or proactive in their decision making. And lastly, because this was the final component of our project and a few months in, and Unity is a frequently researched community, we knew that research fatigue was a real thing. And so we wanted to try and overcome some of the challenges associated with that fatigue and develop more engaging and creative methods that would help us to better understand what we were seeking to understand, but also help the women work through some of their own decision-making processes around the topic.
So knowing that scenario planning works so well in part one of our project, we wanted to kind of incorporate it here, but modify it in a way. And we did this using game simulation. So we did this to explore Unity Women's willingness to adapt and their levels of risk aversion to external stressors, but namely drought, but also land crowding. And we also wanted to see if their preference for money in the bank over more livestock from part 2 translated into their decision-making processes when given a real-life situation or simulation.
So I'm sure you won't be surprised to find out what we did was a game. And we wanted the game to be really straightforward and simple, yet still be interactive and simulate some of the real-life decision-making and challenges that these women face on a daily basis. So here was the board game that we designed. You can see there's 2 sides. On the right here, it starts with a market where the women could either buy more goats or they could sell the goats that they started the game with. Below that is a bank where the women's money that they started the game with is stored, and similarly to the goats, they could use that money to either buy more goats or they could sell the goats they started with and increase their money. On this side is the pasture or rangeland, which has 2 different components to it. One is livestock, in this case goats, and the other is shrubs. So the women started the game with 10 goats, and there was 15 shrubs on the landscape. Really the only, or the most important rule to the game was that there could never be more goats than shrubs on the landscape. So this was the data sheet that we used to record all of their turns. They basically had 6 turns, or decision nodes as we called them. 3 of those turns were kind of a free choice. Do you want to buy goats, sell goats, or do nothing? Turn 2, we explored a little bit with land crowding, and we had neighboring goats come onto the rangeland so that there was less forage for the goats that they had there. And then turns 4 and 5 were our drought turns, and kind of the most important turns to us, the most revealing. We gave the women a set of dice, which was their first time rolling dice, which was kind of interesting. They liked that. We let them roll the dice though, and whatever number those dice landed on, or how many shrubs were taken off the landscape. But before they rolled the dice, we gave them a chance to proactively respond to that and decide whether to buy, sell, or do nothing.
So we have a couple of key takeaways here from this game. And the first is, although they overwhelmingly, all but one woman stated that she would prefer to have money in the bank or more livestock on the land, this did not play out and was not correlated to how they made decisions in our game. And so the graph here shows only 20% of the women who played the game ended with more money in the bank than livestock on the landscape, and 80% either ended with more goats or same as they started. So this could suggest that there are some deep-rooted cultural barriers to this shift that's going on in the society right now that really needs to be explored.
And secondly, we felt that throughout the game, the women really did display a strategic and proactive outlook, especially in terms of the drought turns. You can see their responses here to turns 4 and 5. The first one, all of the women either sold goats or did nothing, and the women who did nothing understood that within the confines of the game, they weren't at risk of losing any goats. For the next turn, it was similar, more women did nothing, and one woman bought goats, but she had sold all her goats when she heard that a drought was coming, so she understood that she was not at a risk of losing any goats for the second turn. So overall, we felt that an aversion to risk and a willingness to adapt was exhibited, which may have positive implications for drought relief and response efforts in the region, but honestly, this was a very small pilot test, which we did feel went well, but definitely more work needs to be done to answer those questions and to look at regional perspectives of drought and the response to drought.
So those are the 3 main parts of our project, and just to reiterate, our major deliverables here were our guidelines document, our community goal book, but then we packaged all this together into a report format to create this applied framework for engaging historically marginalized communities, and placed it within the contextual setting of Samburu, gave some background information, and highlighted our methodological approaches and some other methodological approaches that include community participation and can hopefully improve project relevancy and success in this region. And we intend to distribute this report to NGOs working in the area, hopefully with the help of Samburu Youth Education.
And so again, staying true to CDPR and wanting to bring everything back, we brought all this back to Unity in what we called a community celebration, which was half a presentation and bringing the goal book and the guidelines and the banner and stuff to them, but the other half was just eating and dancing and getting to enjoy the relationships that we built over those 4 months. So it was a really good way to end for us. And now we will go to some final thoughts.
So I'll start with, I was kind of racking my brain, like what to reflect on. Holy crap, this experience, it's 4 months, it's huge. There's so many experiences. I really got some inspiration from an email Brett sent me a few weeks ago. And he said he was hoping to hear this one story that many of you have already heard. That I feel like I learned a lot of life lessons from. I think Brett was joking. I'm pretty 100% sure he was joking. That he was hoping to hear this story, but I think I'm going to tell it anyways. Sorry, Brett. So it was our very first day in Samburu. Will and I had struck off on our own. We were super eager to get started with this whole relationship building process. So we got to Samburu, got to Archer's Post, dropped our bags at the Great County Inn, which a lot of you in here know is far from great, to say the least. To say the least. And we're getting familiar with the room, ready to set out to go to Unity, spend a few hours, and none of the outlets are working in the room. Typical, really. But there's this big switch on the wall, and it's a big red switch, and I look at Will, and I'm like, duh, master switch, flip it on, and we strike off to Unity. And we spend about 4 hours with them. We naively walk into this community that we have only met twice with no translator, and as it turns out, the only three English speakers in this whole village are gone. So it was a bit of a struggle, kind of emotionally draining 4 hours of gestures and mostly silence, where we sat beading, lots of beadwork, very poor beadwork on our hat. And we get back to our hotel room, and all I want to do is relax. I'm physically drained because this climate is rough, as a lot of you in here know, and emotionally drained from this whole first day experience. And all I really want to do is take a shower and relax. So I convinced Will to let me take the first shower, and he begrudgingly lets me. And I get in, I turn on the knob, and instantly I know we got a problem. Because this water is the hottest water I have ever been in my entire life. It is boiling and it's burning me, and out of desperation I'm standing back. And I'm just flapping water all to myself. I'm yelling to Will outside of the bathroom. I'm like, this isn't working, this isn't working. It's very colorful language, really. And
just sitting there laughing, kind of enjoying this.
Yeah, having a glass of wine. And as soon as I decide, okay, this isn't worth it, I'm reaching in to turn the knob again to try to turn this thing off and get around this boiling hot water. And the boiling stream of water stops, and all of a sudden I hear, and this shower head starts spurting scalding hot steam. Scalding hot steam, and at this point I've hit full-blown panic mode. And I step back and I look up, and encasing the shower head, which is typical of this part of the world, is a white plastic, and it is flashing beet red. And I've only been a king in 3 weeks, but I know that that's a problem. You don't have to be familiar with your context to know that if that thing's flashing bright red, you got a problem. And as soon as I saw it red, it hit me. I was like, the master switch. No. That was not the master switch. That was a hot water heater switch, which needed to be turned on maybe 4 seconds, 4 minutes at most, before you got in the shower, and it had been on for 4 hours. So what we had created was a steam bomb inside the shower. So instantly, again, panic, adrenaline, I gotta get out of here. This is bad. This is real bad. And I'm grabbing my towel, I'm trying to make myself decent to get out of this bathroom, and I sling the door open, and as soon as that, and this gunshot goes off. And what this gunshot is that shower head exploding. And I find myself standing in front of Will, and I'm just shaking, but trying to be decent, shaking. And he just looking at me, he's, are you okay? And I just kind of collapse and just start crying hysterically in laughter. Like absolute hilarious. This day has been the biggest struggle that we probably had our entire time in that country. And I mean, we struggled through our first meeting with Unity on our own. Now I've blown up a shower head on our first day, within our first 12 hours at our project site. And standing there in that laughter, I start thinking to myself, holy crap, like what have I got myself into? What are we getting ourselves into? Are we really prepared for this? Like, can we actually do this? Do we have the skills or the abilities to do this? And what I learned in that 4 months to follow was that we were prepared. We did have the skills to do it, and all we really needed to do was just jump right in and go for it. All we really needed to do is flip that switch. Now sometimes that shower head might explode, but more often than not, you're going to have the most rewarding experiences when we put ourselves out there in these challenging and unfamiliar new environments. And going into Kenya, taking these sorts of risks, especially with my career and education, it wasn't really something I ever had much of a problem with, but it's something I had to constantly remind myself that, come on, it's going to be worth it. Just get through it. Jump in there. Give it your all. Do it. Flip the switch. But after my 4 months in Kenya, I do not think I'm going to have an issue with that ever again, and it really taught me to just go for it and give it all you got, and it's going to be one of the most rewarding things that
So that is still one of my favorite Will and Meredith Kenya stories. I don't think I also have a story to tell. Unfortunately, it's not nearly as fun, but I wanted to talk about how our project changed and kind of lessons learned from that shift over the summer. So we were about 2 months into the project. We finished the guidelines, or we were in the process of finishing the guidelines. And we were actually on a little mini break to the coast, and Meredith and I were walking one morning and kind of talking about what the rest of the summer was going to look like. And we had gone into Kenya with some preset ideas of what our project might look like, and the second part was really to focus on women's empowerment, and specifically how empowered women make decisions and what the barriers are to women gaining empowerment. But in that conversation that morning, we started talking more and thinking, you know, within the time we have left, and trying to work with multiple communities to answer these questions, do we really have the ability to dig deep enough to get meaningful answers, and not only meaningful answers for us and to bring back, but also, would it be beneficial to the communities? Would they really get anything out of this? And we started to think maybe this isn't the best way, maybe that's too broad of a focus for us, and we knew that we had developed relationships with the community and that we really cared about these women and wanted our project to work around and with them. And so with that in mind, we changed the scope of our project and made it much more narrow and focused solely on one village, and really not only trying to dig deep to answer questions that we thought were relevant to both conservation and the village, but also to try and make the whole process more beneficial to our participants. And you know, at the time I didn't think that was an unusual switch for me, but I came into CLTL, and most of the people in CLTL know this because we all talked about personality types and did a lot in leadership classes, but I was a very big picture thinker, and I still am. But changing the scope of our project to a much more narrow focus was different for me, but it ended up being a much more rewarding and meaningful and impactful process for both of us, and I would like to say for Unity, hopefully it was. And going forward, I just hope that that is a lesson that I will continue to remember and really shape my views on conservation and work going forward, that sometimes the best approach is not to go wide and shallow, but instead to go narrow and deep. And I feel like in doing so with our project, we were able to create a framework that hopefully may help other people in the future to engage communities that they work with, and maybe in the end still have somewhat of a broader impact. So that's something that I hope I take with me going forward. So now we just have some thank yous, or Asante Sana, Asheo Lang, the Swahili and Samburu terms for thank you.
Yeah, so first and foremost, Unity Women's Village and our committee. Apeen was our friend, our translator, our go-to guy for pretty much everything. And Doriana was our main translator. All these other colleagues, Becca, Sarah, Carrie, Katie, thank you so much. You guys supported our project in more ways than just graphics and design, but also bouncing ideas off our classmates. Dr. Mike Davis and Keith Carlisle at Colorado State University, and of course all our friends at Baylor. Thank you. And I'm done with that.